As you can see, this is being recorded for prosperity because it's the first one, and so others may be able to access it who aren't able to be here tonight because it is very hot and timing is imperfect. If you have not met me before, my name is M. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I'm a storyteller, theatre maker, fairy tale fanatic, and just happens to be the Vice President of the Australian Fairy Tale Society. And tonight's concert is all about stories of love and light. But before we start getting to stories of love and light, it's important to do stuff that isn't necessarily always lovely and light, because we must acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are gathering. For most of us, we are gathering on the lands now known as Australia. There are hundreds upon hundreds, but hundreds of Indigenous nations on these lands who never gave up their sovereignty, whose lands never ceded those lands. And there is a great history of genocide and war and pain and storytelling and love and light in those lands and in those people. To acknowledge that we are on those lands as second, third, and fourth people's descendants from settlers and colonizers. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We have tonight, friends, 5 different storytellers. And while those storytellers are telling, I'm going to suggest that you keep yourselves muted. Most of you don't get random dog noises or ambulances going past, or if you really need to ask your partner for a cup of tea, you can do that to not feel like you're interrupting. So keep yourself muted, and you're welcome to turn your camera off if you'd like, or keep it on. It's nice to be able to have people to look at when you're storytelling, but you know, you're also in the privacy of your own home, so if you want to turn it off because it's going to make it a more enjoyable experience for you, you are welcome. If you have any questions for the storytellers, like, oh my goodness, that was incredible, or I'm a bit confused about that thing, or I wonder if they've thought, hold on to those, you can put them into chat, or at the very end of the concert, we'll open up the floor and have a bit of free Q&A. So don't feel like you need to raise your hand at the story and go, oh, I need to know. Note it down, get in chat, and we'll circle back to it for later. I think that's all that's important, except, oh yes, who's going first? Well, as I'm emceeing, probably makes sense for me to start. The story I'm going to tell to you tonight, friends, is a Scottish traveller story. At least the version I know is a Scottish traveller story, but I know there are Irish versions, there are Scandinavian versions, there are many different versions, but you probably haven't heard this version unless you've heard me tell it before, and you've heard me tell it before, you're probably going to be okay with me telling it again. The story goes like this. The laird was having a cake. Now, for those of us that don't speak Scots Gaelic, what's a laird and what's a ceilidh? Well, a laird is sort of like a rich landowner. Not quite a duke or an earl or a lord or a king, but someone who has a fair bit of land and is fairly wealthy. And a ceilidh, well, a ceilidh is a very special type of party. It's a party where you have to bring something. No, not just anything. This isn't a bring a plate to the after-church luncheon situation. This isn't bring a lovely wrapped present with a neat bow situation. This is a situation where you need to bring entertainment. An old song played, a new song played, old, a riddle, a rhyme, a dance, or above anything, a story. And the laird loved stories. He loved stories more than anything else in the world. It was said that the laird had a bit of a black art about him, a bit of raven's knowledge, if you will. But as far as anyone knew, this was just one of the stories that the laird so dearly loved to tell and to hear. And he was so in love with hearing stories that on this particular ceilidh, he announced whoever could tell the best story of the night would get a solid gold sovereign. And that was a lot of money, more than pretty much anyone there would earn in a year. So immediately, everyone tries to tell their best story. There are short stories, tall tales, local legends, accidental anecdotes, riddles, rhymes, everything in between. Each and every person tries to tell their very best story in the hopes of winning that sovereign. And finally, it got around to Sandy. Now, Sandy looked after the cows of the laird's estate. Sandy was tall, a bit gruff, a bit of a sort of keep yourself to yourself in personality, a bit solitary figure, if you will. Friendly enough, but, you know, didn't attend things regularly, didn't really know anyone, and no one really knew Sandy. And so the laird turned to Sandy and said, well, what story have you got for us? Sandy looked at the laird and said, I'm sorry, sir, I don't have a story. Come on, Sandy, everyone's got something. What are you going to tell? I'm sorry, sir, I don't have a story. Now, come on, Sandy, everyone else has contributed. Everyone else has given something. What are you going to tell? I'm sorry, sir, said Sandy. I don't have a story. Right. You can step out of this hall right now, Sandy. You're not going to come back until either A, You have cleaned my boat so clean it is as if it was made this morning, or you have a story. It's when the dead silent Sandy stood up and left the hall. And just as Sandy stepped to the door, the laird turned to the man and said, "All right, let's have a jig." And the Cayley continued. Well, Sandy walked down the path until there was the laird's boat. Now, Sandy was not particularly used to boats. Cows was Sandy's domain, but task was given, and so a task Sandy would do. There was cleaning, there was scrubbing, there was getting rid of that sludgy green slime, there was clipping off barnacles, and then Sandy saw that there was some water in the boat and knew that it needed to be bailed out. So a pail was found, and Sandy stepped in, reached down to bail the water out as the boat began to move. I don't mean it rocked. I don't mean the current came along. I mean, as if possessed, the boat started flurrying towards the horizon, getting faster and faster and faster. "Help!" called Sandy. "Help! Somebody help me! I can't swim. I've never been this far out from land before. Help! Help!" Sandy yelled and screamed to high heaven and low hell, but no one could hear Sandy, and nothing would stop this boat moving. It went on until Sandy was hoarse and collapsed into the boat and went into a deep, dead sleep. When Sandy woke up, that boat was still moving fast as fast. Sandy was terrified, but hoped that maybe there would be some sight of land, but there was nothing, just clear blue sea. So Sandy carefully held the edge of the boat and looked overboard, just in case maybe it wasn't too deep and Sandy could, jump out and walk. But as Sandy leaned over and looked in that sea, there was something strange about the reflection. Previously, Sandy had short-cropped hair and hadn't shaved in a few days, but now Sandy's hair was long and was clean shaven. And that tough leather jerkin and the work shirt and the gruff pants had been replaced with a most gorgeous silk dress. And those shoes, in desperate need of repair, were now fine satin slippers. And as Sandy stood up in that boat, she realized that she was a woman. And then, boom, the boat stopped. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there was an island, and the boat had run amok. Well, Sandy stepped out and wandered somewhat aimlessly, trying to find some sense of what was going on, until she met a man who asked, "Excuse me, who are you? And where'd you come from?" For it was a very isolated island, and travellers did not come here easily. But Sandy could not explain where she had come from, where she was going. In fact, she couldn't explain anything at all. So the man took Sandy into the little village on the island, and everyone gathered together, and they all had a chat and all had a talk, and they all tried to work out what to do with this mysterious woman. And they soon realized if they didn't know where she'd come from and she didn't really know where she was going, in fact, she didn't really know much at all, the best choice was probably just to welcome her into the community. But that means she needs a job. So what can you do? They asked. "Well, I'm pretty good at looking after cows," says Sandy. And the villagers found that Sandy was underselling it a bit. Those cows on that island had never had such tender care as when they were in the embrace of Sandy. And not just the cows, the pigs, the chickens, everything. Even random animals from the forest, hares and sparrows, had such beautiful care with Sandy. Oh, they were the happiest animals alive. And Sandy soon became part of that community. And after a good while, she fell in love with that man she'd met on her very first day. And they got married in the little chapel on that island. And being a small village, everyone came to the wedding, and what a glorious party I can barely describe happened that night. And a while after that, Sandy and her husband had 3 boisterous children, 3 sons, and life could not be sweeter. And then one day, many years later, Sandy, her husband, and 3 children are walking along the shore on a warm summer's day, but full of them tonight. And the boys are running back and forth between the woods and the waves, and Sandy's husband is watching to make sure no one skins too many knees or gets too damp. And then Sandy sees something strange overhead, looks a bit ahead, and finds it's the boat. That same boat that had brought her here all that time ago. That brought her this life, her husband, children, her community. And she was so overwhelmed, she turned over the boat to see what state it was in. Maybe they could take it back to the village as some sort of memorial or something for the kids to play on. And as Sandy stepped inside to see what there cracks or damages, the tide came in and the boat came out. And as if possessed, that boat travelled faster and faster towards the horizon, further and further away from the island. Sandy screamed to high level and oh hell for someone to stop her, to stop the boat. So it's taking everything away from her. Her husband heard, but he was busy dealing with the boys climbing trees, and it was too late. It didn't matter how fast he ran, it didn't matter how far he waded into the water. The boat kept travelling and travelling and travelling. And Sandy screamed until her voice was hoarse and she collapsed, crying herself into a dead sleep. But when Sandy woke up, the boat was still. It was night. In the distance, there was a ceilidh going on. In fact, Sandy realised it was the same ceilidh, because as Sandy stood up, everything had changed back. Sandy, dazed and confused, walked up the path back into the hall, and just as stepping through the front hall, the lad said, "Sandy, either my boat is clean as the day it was made, or you have a story." In a very soft voice, Sandy related everything that I have told you thus far, the incredible detail. And when Sandy got to the exact point I'm at right now, the lad turned and said, "Well, if that isn't the best story we've heard all night, I was funny and so unlikely, yet you told with such honesty here," and flinged the solid gold sovereign to Sandy. Well, then more G's commenced, and more riddles and more dances, and everyone had a delightful time, but Sandy looked at the sovereign and then looked out the hall and ran back down the path and jumped into the boat. It just rocked. Sandy looked at that solid gold sovereign and looked out at the horizon. The sun was just beginning to rise. This was a lot of money. It was worth more than Sandy would earn in a year, maybe two. But all of that monetary worth didn't have an iota of the value of everything that had been taken. Life, husband, children, community. And so in a fit of impulse, Sandy threw that solid gold sovereign far into the sea, and it landed with a plop, ripples cascading out. And those ripples, they touched the boat. And then the boat started to move, as if possessed. But this time, no, Sandy did not cry, scream to high heaven or low hell. No, Sandy stood proud and strong as the boat sailed into the dawn. Sandy, well, Sandy beamed, knowing all that awaited her. The end, for now. Thank you for listening to, or indulging me in When Pipe Ugly Want, my favourite story in the world. But it's just a start. This is not the only story of love and light we have tonight, my friends. No, we have other stories too. And I'm in fact going to now take us to our second storyteller. In fact, the first storyteller who actually signed up and isn't just MC and is submitted to a story, because they're here. And that is Leanbh, who's going to share with us a fantastic retelling of a story that you might already know. A story that is Arthurian, but it's also by Tennyson. This is The Lady of Shallott, but this is not the Lady of Shallott you've heard before. It is one, in fact, that it's not one I have heard before, because I haven't heard it. Leanbh has not told it to me yet, but I'm going to get to hear it tonight with all of you. So please give a warm welcome to Leanbh with The Curse of Shallott.
Thank you all so much. So yes, I'll just do a quick bio read. So I live on Ngunnawal country, which is in Canberra. I am an award-winning LGBTQI and disability author. I'm mostly writing in horror and dark fantasy. I'm inspired by fairy tales, folklore, myth, history, and also our climate. I've judged the Shadows Awards. I've also judged part of the Aurealis Awards, been an invited panelist, and I'm a member of the ASA, the AFWA, the AFTS, the BFSA, HWA, and SFWA. That's a lot of acronyms. So I've been awarded a mentorship, and I've also been DITMA nominee, and I've also the 2022 winner of the Australian Horror Writers Robert and Stevenson Flash Fiction Award. So my alter ego also exists in the world of academia, evolution and prehistory. But tonight, I'm going to tell you something a little bit different, a darker, if you can imagine, retelling of the Lady of Shallott. I fell in love with Tennyson's poem a long time ago, so here we go. The Curse of Shallott. I saw the world only through fragments. I wove a tapestry in pieces sewn together to make a whole. My weaving was perfect, and as good as I was, I'd never know the true beauty of the world beyond this windowless tower. The Tower of Shallott was named for the small island it perched upon, in the middle of the greater river that ran towards Camelot. If the tower was named only for the island it occupied, then I was the Lady of Shallott, the lady of an isolated island and a cursed tower that I could never leave. Trapped within these wretched stone walls and forced to endure its loneliness ever since the witch and her curse imprisoned me here. From my single tower room, I watched the world pass around me like the river around the island. There is no true window. The tower is completely walled, closed away from the world that I long to join. I have a small mirror which is blessed by the witch's magic, and that's also cursed me. It shows me its fragments of the world beyond the tower. I've clutched it tightly many times and prayed fleeting blessings even as much as I've cursed and screamed at it. This is the duality of my life, a blessing and a curse. Everything I see is like a reflection cast upon the water, and with a single ripple, something else is revealed. How I've desired to be among the ladies of Camelot and part of courtly life. On my way to Camelot as a young girl, astride her palfrey, and knight at her side, we'd stopped to help an old woman. My knight did warn me of the glamour some witches could use. She was no witch, just an old woman with an injured foot. She bore no similarity to the witches I'd read tales about. They were cruel and unkind to those who ignored or abused them. This witch I met along the roadside was neither unkind nor hideous. She was just poor and feeble. I helped her to the banks of the river that flows towards Camelot. Perhaps her glamour had bespelled me, or she had manipulated my kindness. I left my knight and followed her across the water to her small boat, and then aided her to the bottom of the tower. The door was unlocked, and no sooner had I stepped into the keep did the witch drop her glamour. She was a sorceress, far more powerful than any mere witch, and acted on whims known only to her. She spoke to me with a complex riddle that spun my curse. The door shut swiftly behind me and locked. I screamed, I cried, and I begged. I shouted for help, but it didn't matter. There was no one to hear me through the thick walls of the stone tower. Whatever glamour or magic she worked upon my knight, I don't know. The tower, this windowless prison, and his fate is unknown. I ventured upstairs to the large room at the top of the tower. It was tidy and looked like it was just waiting for its occupant to return. The gleaming gold-rimmed mirror was in the center of the bed. There was a loom in one corner and a small window seat beneath where a window should have been. I picked up the mirror, and it guided my understanding of the world since. There would be no knight for me to marry, no hand-fasting under the watchful gaze of King Arthur and his court. Instead, this room would be my only prison until I died. I'd been unloved and unknown by everyone unless I escaped this lonely tower. Had the sorceress travelled to King Arthur's court in my place? Had she left me this final warning? if I ever chose to escape the Tower of Shallott, my death would be swift. Now I watched the peasants harvesting crops before the great feast to celebrate the wedding of King Arthur and his lady Guinevere. I knew the lives of the peasants as though I walked among them, and how I longed to speak with them while I watched them resting in the cool shade of the willows on the opposite bank to my tower. Ducks darted in and out of the rushes, and smaller wrens sung sweetly. I would never have that easy camaraderie or company even these peasants had. I had been a lady of substance, but now I could only rely on glimpses of the world through a mirror. 2 young kitchen maids from Camelot were dangling their feet in the water and stared across the tower. It is likely covered or obscured by a wild forest that I'd only ever caught the barest glimpses in the edge of the mirror. The maids were soon joined by the kitchen lads, and the secretive glances they cast between each other. To have a lover to call my own and enjoy the passions other took for granted. I had made good use of the loom in my time of incarceration. I had created a tapestry from scenes I'd witnessed, every fragment, including the smiling ladies riding their palfreys, singing troubadours and peasants while they worked in the fields. And in the distance, beyond the forest and the curving river, was the turrets of Camelot. I stared into the mirror, my gaze following the familiar meandering of the river. I sat up straighter, watching a procession of ladies and knights as they rode towards Camelot. The loom clacked softly in the background as I worked this new scene into my tapestry. I paused, and I took up my mirror. The striking scarlet-coloured helmet plumes and shining golden armour made the knight seem like the sun himself. His black war-horse pranced and chafed at the bit. I knew his name, Lancelot. He could be for no one else. I clutched the mirror tightly, my heart beating erratically. He had no idea of my very existence. If he, above all others, knew my name, I would have some purpose. I would have someone in my life. The loom fell silent and stilled my trembling hands. The shining red and gold knight mounted on his black horse was eye-catching on the tapestry. I clutched that golden mirror and looked at the closed door to my tower room. I couldn't live in this cage any longer. A short life full of emotion, and to look into Lancelot's eyes would be enough meaning for me. I moved a white thread through the tapestry to hastily add my name so that I would not die unknown. Lancelot would be opposite to my island, where there is the deepest bend in the river. I pulled the tapestry free from the loom, the threads still untied and hanging loose. I left the tower and the curse the witch had placed upon me, and if it was true, perhaps I might make it to Camelot, and Lancelot would know my face, and King Arthur would know how the sorceress had imprisoned me. The doorknob turned beneath my hand. I trembled with equal parts fear and excitement and pushed the door open. The corridor beyond was empty and covered in thick dust. Cobwebs hung like curtains and almost as thick. I pushed through them and hurried down the spiral staircase. My slippers were silent on the stone, but I felt the witch's curse weaving its way through my body. I was subjected to a tainted substance that was nearly palpable. I had only a little time to make my escape. The witch had teased me with promises that a little narrow boat was kept moored by the dock just beyond the castle door. The gleefulness in her tone always suggested to me that there was no truth in her words. Through her temptation that I bring this curse upon myself. Heart rate pounding in my temples and legs shaking, I threw my entire body weight against that tower door at the base. It flung open, slamming against the tower wall. I stumbled through and nearly fell to my knees on the grass sward before the tower door. The world beyond was the one I had seen in my tapestry, but it was overwhelming. So many scents and textures, here the sounds of small and larger animals as the evening drew close, and there the scent of freshly ripened wheat. In the depths of the rushes there was a single lantern that bobbed in the darkness. The boat, for which I'd mentioned? I stumbled down the broken pathway as weakness dragged at my limbs. Yes, there it was in the rushes, the golden light of a lantern. The dock was short and small. It moored only one vessel, a long, narrow boat that would carry me to the man I loved and my final destination. I knew I loved Lancelot, despite the mirror only showing me his virtue, loyalty, and integrity. I'd be certain he'd know me before I died. Carefully, I lowered myself into the little boat. It rocked so violently and threatened to toss me into the waters. Once settled on the single seat, one candle mysteriously already lit at the lantern bow, I pushed the vessel into the current of the river. The boat gathered speed as it headed further into the current of the river, which went nowhere but to Camelot. Draping the tapestry around my shoulders, with the Lady of Shallott stitched along the top of its massive fabric. Shivers and chills racked my body, and I stretched out in the boat to lie along its base. The river took me closer to Camelot and to my Lancelot. My eyes focused on the vastness of the stars above. The witch hadn't lied about the curse she'd placed upon me. I was dying with each lap of water against the hull of this little boat. But still the river carried me towards my destination, my breath a soft rattle in my lungs, a sorrowful sound consumed by the frogs and songs of night birds. Soon I'd be with Lancelot and feel the touch of another person after so many years. My limbs were white, my fingers bluish on the tips. My teeth chattered, but I forced myself to focus on Lancelot. My breath was fading, my life slowly ebbing away. Will the boat reach Camelot in time? Will I gaze at last upon its splendors? The voices of many men and women from the castle echoed through the night. I was close now. There, the flaring torches of the wall sconces greeted me in the darkness. The boat swung on the current. My fingers were numb where they clutched the tapestry bearing my name. King Arthur and all of Camelot would finally know me, the Lady of Shallott. My eyesight was darkening around the edges as the bow of the boat bumped to the side of the stonework surrounding the lake. Still, I could just see the assembled knights and ladies of the court. My shallow breathing hitched. Bright red plumes and a shining golden armor approached like the sun out of the darkness. The knight gently pushed through the crowd of whispering ladies and courtiers who gathered on the banks. My failing heart fought the witch's curse. At the sight of Lancelot above me, love overwhelmed me and kindled my heart. My Lancelot. The words were a whisper. It couldn't possibly be heard above the noise of the crowd. The Lady of Shallott. Lancelot gently plucked at the tapestry covering my body. He read the words I'd carefully stitched into the cloth and worn like a mantle. To hear my name spoken by another after so long in silence was contentment. I met Lancelot's fierce gaze as the shadows of death loomed above us. The curse finally stole breath from my lungs, but I was content. Lancelot's face and my name spoken again on his lips were my final memories. Thank you.
That was. Make sure I can actually not sound like I'm echoing, because that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. A question I want to know, well, I'd like to know the answer to. I know the question, I don't know the answer, is what drew you to the Lady of Shallott in the first place?
For me, I've always loved this sort of sorrowful lady who is willingly going towards, her death, but you know, like it's sort of, I was interested in how she would have lived, like her loneliness, her isolation, what would have made her, drawn her to do such an action, which, you know, would surely, well, it would be her end. But, you know, I wanted to sort of delve into, you know, that feeling of love, of loss, of loneliness, that sort of human connection that we all crave, even if it's going to kill us, I suppose. Yeah, that, you know, that romance, you know, and it is very much in the pre-Raphaelite style of romance. You know, the nature surrounding her, the world that she hasn't seen. Yeah.
Delve into it. You absolutely did. Thank you so much for being a part of tonight and sharing that with us. We are now going to go to our next storyteller, which is Laura Fulton. And Laura has another written story, The Convict Brides. Laura, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and tell us about The Convict Brides before you actually tell us about The Convict Brides?
Sure. Yeah, I hadn't really prepared a bio to share with everyone. Sorry.
Your surprise or anecdote or something.
Yeah, so I am a writer, educator, researcher, essayist, memoirist, writing from Wurundjeri land, just outside Melbourne. I wrote a PhD right at the end of COVID, and I've been focusing on creative work ever since and some research. I've discovered the Australian Fairy Tale Society, I guess, in 2022, and have just like really enjoyed being part of this community. I'm really intrigued by the idea of fairy tales. Yeah, I have my own sort of personal connection with fairy tales, as I presented in the first conference, or my first conference in 2022. And I was really intrigued by the idea of the distinctly Australian fairy tale. So I am on the committee co-editing the newest. So South of the Sun was the first anthology of the Australian Fairy Tale Society. And Priti and I, and there's a few of us here tonight, we're working on the next installation of the Australian Fairy Tale Society anthology. So I was intrigued by that challenge of what would a distinctly Australian fairy tale look like. So I set myself that challenge of writing an original Australian fairy tale. So what I am sharing with you tonight is a shortened version of a story that I am preparing for the anthology. So this is the bare bones of that story that I'm sharing, that I'm hoping to share for the anthology. And this scarf seemed like a really good idea earlier tonight when it was 900 degrees. So bear with me. So this is The Convict Brides, an Australian fairy tale. One dark, dreary day, 3 English maids, Missy, Prissy, and Rose, found themselves standing before the London magistrate. "See here," said the magistrate, "what brings you before me today?" "I stole bread, or so they say," said Missy, quiet and shy, "but I did nothing wrong." "I stole 3 silver spoons," said Prissy, loud and sassy, "but I did nothing wrong." "I stole wild game from the woods, or so they say," said Rose, calm and even, "but I did nothing wrong." "Perhaps you stole, perhaps you did not," said the magistrate. "The goods were never recovered. But I see you 3 are all alike in countenance, not too pretty, not too plain. Go to Australia and choose husbands for yourselves from among the king's men. Marry by Christmas next, and your sentences will be forgotten. Refuse, and you will become convicts yourselves, your sentences to be fulfilled in that faraway land. So it was, the very next day, the 3 maids boarded a ship. For many long and arduous months, they sailed the rough and ragged seas, further and further from home. At last, they arrived in Australia, where everything was strange and different. On the dock stood their chaperone. "You will stay at my boarding house and work for me until you marry. Put on your finest dresses. We're going to a bush dance. At the dance, the chaperone pulled the maids aside. She nodded to an old man sitting in the corner. Now this is the merchant, said the chaperone. He is the prize, a man of great wealth. Look at his fine clothes, his thick rings, the shiny buckles on his shoes. See how old he is? He will die soon, leaving you a rich widow with many servants. You can do as you please. Next, the chaperone nodded to a handsome young man in a red uniform, smiling and laughing. This is the soldier, said the chaperone. He guards the convict colony, but soon he will get new orders. He will go warring and leave you in peace with his fat salary. You can do as you please. With luck, he will die, serving his country. You can go home, a hero's widow. Finally, the chaperone nodded to a plain, sturdy man, his simple clothes clean and tidy, his ordinary hat held in his hands. This is the farmer, said the chaperone, her nose curled. He was once a convict and now raises food for the colony. A farmer's life is hard. You don't want to get stuck with him. When the dance was over, the chaperone bundled the maids into the carriage. Wait here, said the chaperone with a wink. I must go back inside for a moment. Alone in the dark, the maids clasped hands, afraid and excited. Suddenly, they heard a noise. Hee, 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 said a wee little voice. You need me. In the shadows stood a wee little man, smaller than small, smaller than any true man who ever lived. Who's there? Said Missy. Someone and no one, said the wee little man. You've always known me and we've never met. What do you want? Said Prissy. I want to help you, said the wee little man. I have a beauty tonic guaranteed to make you irresistible to whomever you desire. Give me your money and you will surely find the very best husband for you. It's a small price to pay for a convict bride. Should we trust you? Said Rose. You shouldn't, said the man, or you should. Do as you like. Come find me in the woods behind the livery. And the wee little man was gone. The very next day, at the end of their work, the three maids returned to their bedroom. I must go, said Prissy. The merchant has come calling. He wants to see me. Such wonderful news, said Missy. I'm happy for you, said Rose. How did you win his attention, said Missy, for the three maids were all alike in countenance, not too pretty, not too plain. I found the wee little man, said Prissy. He gave me a bottle of his beauty tonic and I drank it all up. On the way home, I saw the merchant across the way. I have become irresistible to him. You two should get some tonic of your own. How much did it cost? Said Missy. Not too high a price, said Prissy, but she would not say what she had given the wee little man, nor where she had got the means to pay. As soon as she had gone, Missy and Rose agreed. The tonic may have made Prissy irresistible to the merchant, but they could see no difference. Just then, the chaperone knocked on the door. Come, Rose, said the chaperone. We have a guest. You must prepare the tea. On her way to the kitchen, Rose passed the parlor. There sat the merchant in his fine clothes. He leaned across the table, staring at Prissy, who peeked from behind a folded fan. They accused me of theft, Rose heard Prissy say, but it was a lie. They call me a convict, but they never found a thing. I did nothing wrong. You will be my bride, said the merchant. On the table lay 3 silver spoons. In the corner, the chaperone smiled wide and wider. I wish them all the best, said Rose to herself, and she went on her way. The very next day, at the end of their work, now 2 maids returned to their bedroom. I must go, said Missy. The soldier has come to see me. Such wonderful news, said Rose. I'm happy for you. Only an accident that I won his attention, said Missy, for the 2 maids were both alike in countenance, not too pretty, not too plain. I found the wee little man, said Missy. He gave me a bottle of his beauty tonic, but I did not drink it, for I was afraid. When I threw it away, I splashed a little on my hands. On my way home, I saw the soldier across the way. I must have become irresistible to him. Maybe you should get some tonic of your own? How much did it cost? Said Rose. Not too high a price, said Missy. I had a little money given to me by my father before I came to this place. As soon as she had gone, Rose thought to herself, the tonic may have made Missy irresistible to the soldier, but she could see no difference. Just then, the chaperone knocked on the door. Come, Rose, said the chaperone. We have a guest. You must prepare the tea. On her way to the kitchen, Rose passed the sitting room. There sat the soldier, smiling and handsome. He leaned across the table, staring at Missy, who tucked her head and smiled, sweet and true. They accused me of theft, Rose heard Missy say, but it was a lie. My father stole bread because we were starving. I said it was me, lying to protect my family. They call me a convict, but beyond this falsehood, I did nothing wrong. If you will be my bride, said the soldier, I will take you home to London. When I get my new orders, you can live near your family whom you love while I go warring. Missy and the soldier smiled wide and wider. I wish them all the best, said Rose to herself, and she went on her way. The very next day was a day of rest. Rose woke to a tap, tap, tap on her window. The wee little man crouched in the early morning shadows. Christmas is coming, said the wee little man. The farmer was once a convict. He must be cruel indeed. Give me your money, whatever you have, and I will make you irresistible. Maybe he will beat you. Maybe he will not beat you too badly. But Rose would not be fooled. She closed the window and pulled the curtains tight. Just then, the chaperone knocked on the door. Come, Rose, said the chaperone. We have a guest. There stood the farmer, his simple clothes clean and tidy, his ordinary hat held in his hands. When he saw Rose, he smiled so broad, his eyes crinkled. If you please, my lady, said the farmer, will you walk with me? Rose and the farmer walked and walked through the meadow, beside the stream, under the leafy gum trees. I am only a farmer, said the farmer, and once a convict. They accused me of theft, but my land was seized and given to the crown's lords. The game I killed was mine. I did nothing wrong. But I see you are laughing at me. Why do you laugh? I did the same, said Rose. I hunted on land that once belonged to all of us. They called me a convict, but it was a lie. I would not have you chained to me in a marriage of bondage, said the farmer. Marry whomever you choose, or we can run away and live off the land together, live off the land, alone or together, whatever you desire. I would not live in bondage, said Rose, but you are kind and hardworking, honest and fair, and I do so love the way your eyes crinkle when you smile. Will you marry me? The farmer smiled, wide and wider. Christmas came, and the people of the convict colony organized a party. At the party, Rose saw Missy and rushed into her arms. I'm so glad to see you, said Rose. Are you well? Yes, yes, said Missy. My husband, the soldier, has received his new orders. We will return to England and live near my family, whom I love. And the soldier did just as he promised, and he and Missy lived long lives together, and they were happy. Rose saw Prissy ride by in a fine carriage, a scowl on her face. Ah, there goes the merchant's wife, said a voice Rose knew well, the woman who had once been her chaperone. I'm so glad to see her, said Rose, and you, is she well? As well as she can be, said the chaperone. The merchant hired several servants, but nothing and no one was good enough for her. Now she does all the work herself. And the merchant, said Rose. He pays her no mind, said the chaperone. He goes about his business as satisfied as he ever was. And Prissy grew more and more unhappy, always mumbling, always grumbling, and the merchant lived and lived and lived. And the chaperone, having no want or need of a husband, carried on quite happily by herself. Rose returned to her own simple house. There she and the farmer grew vegetables and hunted together and told each other stories. They were kind to each other and laughed with each other and tried every night to count all the stars in the wide, wide Australian sky. And they were happy. The end.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I want to know, because you are an Australian American, so it's not like you've grown up with an ancient tradition of being a colonizing white person in Australia. What particular things have you sort of connected with that drew you to writing what is a very Australian fairy tale?
Well, I tried to think of the things that make a fairy tale, and as a committee, we're still sort of deciding exactly what that is. But yeah, there's the repetition and the threes and the elements of the magical with the wee little man who is obviously like not a small person, but a wee little man. But then also blend that together with things that I've been trying to decide if this is a story that could only happen in Australia, or if but it's definitely distinctly Australian, with the transportation and we all know, I guess, that the way the women were brought out to be, there were convict brides, in a much less jolly version of what I've portrayed, but so I was drawn to those elements, that what would make a story a fairy tale, but also distinctly Australian. And in my longer version of the story, there are a lot more distinctly Australian elements to do with the landscape, and the magistrate and his clerk are the villains of the tale, and it kind of gets turned around on them because they think they are punishing the maids by sending them off to horrible Australia, but London is dark and dreary and wet and damp and horrible, and they send Australia off, and at least in terms of the landscape, it's a beautiful place. So that was what
I look forward to hearing the full version with all its additional wonderful twists and turns at a later date. Thank you so much for sharing the shortened version you have tonight.
Thank you.
Priti, you are up next. Priti, who has been managing the tech for us so far and is also with me helping, and others, helping to organise our AFTS conference this year in August, is now going to share a story. But it's not necessarily a story that you normally share, is it, Priti?
No, it's not. It's not a story that I've ever shared before. It's one that I've loved since I was a child. I just thought it was fun and magical. But it's an Indian story. But like all Indian stories, there's a lot of backstory and a weaving in story, and it just gets so long that I never knew what to do. So this time I'm going to experiment and do something new.
Excellent. Well, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Em. So, like I said, this story is an Indian one, and it is from Maharashtra, the heart of Maharashtra, which is a large state in Western India, and it's known for its bustling cities. Mumbai is one of them, so is Pune. And of course, it has a rich heritage, like almost all places in India. And this place is called Pandharpur. It's a famous pilgrim center, and it has been, this has fascinated me forever since I was a child, because the deity of this temple is an incarnation of Krishna, who is a very famous Indian, figure. A lot of people know him. And his incarnation is called Vitthoba. And he appears standing on a brick with his ears adorned with earrings made of fish. But there's more to this sacred place that meets the eye. It is supposed to have a miraculous origin. It is supposed to be self-created, sprung from the rocks, and not by human hands. It is done by divine will. How? Well, that's what I'm here to tell you today. So, Pundalik was the only child of his parents, and he had been brought up with great love and affection, but he fell into bad company, as it sometimes happens, and he was everything a parent did not want their child to be. A day did not pass that he was not rude to his parents, that he hadn't picked a fight, that he hadn't harassed people. He mistreated his family. He spent his time gambling, drinking, and, with his goon friends. His mother attempted to speak to him. Pundalik, you've spent all our money. Just leave those friends. Come back home. We love you. The only answer he has was, go away. Don't listen to me. And then he told his mother, give me your gold. And he literally ripped off her gold bangles and the necklace that she wore and as well as one that belonged to his wife. Pundalik's poor mother was forced, with everything gone, with every last bit of wealth gone, she had to beg the neighbors for a little rice so that they would not starve. Because of her generosity, her kind nature, all the neighbors loved her and they gladly helped her out. But they pitied her, and the proud woman that she was, she couldn't bear their whispers and the talk behind her back. She was so ashamed that, she went to Pundalik's father and said, I will not live like this anymore. It is better to die than to beg. And if we must beg, let us go to Kashi, and we can die in peace. So what is Kashi? Kashi is the spiritual name for a northern city in Varanasi, in India. It is considered a very holy place. It is called the City of Light or the Shining City. It is said that anyone that dies here will go straight to heaven, or he will gain enlightenment and be freed from the cycle of birth and death. The very next day, the old couple gathered up their meager belongings and left. Pundalik's wife cried and wept and begged to go with them, but they finally convinced her, saying that a wife's place was by her husband's side. When Pundalik returned home, sober for once, he immediately asked for his parents. They have gone to Kashi, said his wife. Well, let them go. I'm hungry. Get me some food. There's no food in the house. Then go borrow some from the neighbors. No one will lend us anything, said the wife. They only helped us because of your parents. They were loved, and you? No one really cares for you, neither do I, and so I must suffer for your actions. Pundalik didn't think too much and went to the moneylender. Within minutes of arriving, the moneylender had him thrown out. Get out! I'm not going to lend you a penny or a pie. Your parents have left. Who will repay your loans? He went to his good-for-nothing friends, and they all avoided him. They had no need of someone with no money. After a few days of going hungry, Pundalik realized the truth, that his parents were the only ones that had ever cared for him, and he had driven them away. He was filled with regret, remorse. Oh, what have I done? What have I done? Will I ever be forgiven? I think I will have to go to Kashi and purify myself in the sacred Ganga. And then I will stop gambling and start working. And so he set off the very next day, and his wife, of course, came with him. They crossed dense forests, they forded rivers, and when his wife could not walk a single step more, he settled her under a tree and went in search of some berries or fruit that they could eat. His wife ate, he ate, and then she dropped off to sleep while he kept guard. As he looked around, he suddenly heard a sound. Rustling leaves, tinkling anklets, gentle giggles. Oh no, what is this? What is that? And he found a big stick and crept towards the sound. He was so surprised to see 3 ladies who looked like they were cloaked in darkness, moving through that jungle. He couldn't contain his curiosity and followed them. And there, a little into the distance, was a beautiful little cottage in a clearing that seemed to be filled with light. It seemed that there was a sage sitting deep in meditation under a tree. And Pundalik watched as the 3 women went into the courtyard, started sweeping. They cleaned the entire place. They sprinkled water on the ground. They spread cow dung on it, because that is how they made floors in those days. They watered the plants and literally cleaned up the beautiful hermitage. And as they did, a drastic change came over them. That cloak of darkness, it disappeared and was replaced by a beautiful, beautiful glow. And it seemed as they were now covered in gold light that shone and sparkled. Pundalik couldn't believe his eyes. They must be goddesses. And when they had finished and quietly tiptoeing away, he couldn't resist and stopped them right in their path. "Oh, Devi," Devi means goddess, "are you goddesses or are you a heavenly nymph from the heaven?" The women were startled and they shoot him as if he were a fly. "Go away! Ugh! Don't stand in our way. You're one of the worst sinners in the world. If you come in front of us, you will sully all our night's work. We will be late. Go away." He fell to his knees. "Oh, please, 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 please have mercy on me. I know I have sinned. I'm going to find my parents. I'm repenting. Who are you?" They looked at each other and they looked at him. And they fell as they picked him up. One by one they said, "I am River Ganga. I am River Yamuna. And I am River Saraswati." Pundalik couldn't believe it. The 3 mightiest rivers in Bharat. They continued. "Every day, countless pilgrims come to bathe in our waters, and we become heavy, and their darkness follows us. We come here to purify ourselves, so we cleanse the souls that come to us. This is sage Kukut's ashram." Pundalik had never even heard of this sage, nor of a spot so powerful as to cleanse the mighty rivers themselves. Why here? How is this sage so powerful that 3 mighty rivers come to clean his ashram and are purified themselves? And they replied, Rishi Kukut served his parents with unconditional love and devotion. His service was so pure that he is now surrounded with a bright light that purifies everything that it touches. This whole place is filled with light. And when we come here, we are purified, and all the sins of countless people that give us their darkness are washed away. Now, shoo, go away. We have to go. Pundalik stepped out of their way and walked into the hermitage as if in a daze. He walked to the sage who sat in deep meditation in a perfectly blissful pose under a tree, and he sat on the ground and waited patiently. He was so overcome that when the sage opened his eyes, he couldn't speak. But the sage was omniscient and understood everything. And he said, Now, calm down. Your tears have washed away all your sins. You are free. You have a clean slate, and you can begin afresh. If you want true happiness, though, you must find your parents, and you must serve them. And then you can worship Krishna, so you too can be free. It will be a simple life, but it will be a good one. Filled with the sage's light, Pundalik ran back to his wife and told her everything. They were now on a mission to find his parents. Kashi no longer had any meaning for him. His parents had traveled very slowly, and so Pundalik caught up with them fairly quickly, and he begged their forgiveness. Of course they forgave him, and together they went to Kashi, said their prayers, and then they traveled to a place called Pandharpur, where he built a small hut for all of them to stay. He served him with devotion and respect. He studied the scriptures, he meditated on Lord Krishna, and did everything that the sage had said. And just as the sage had predicted, he led a simple life and a good one. They were peaceful and happy. But this isn't the end. No, this is where ideally in a fairy tale there would be a happy ending, but there is more. One afternoon, Pundalik's father was resting, and Pundalik was massaging his father's feet. It was hot, like today, and he was in a bit of a daze, perhaps even nodding off a little, when he heard someone call him in a very melodious, charming voice. Pundalik! Pundalik started, and a bright light seemed to be moving towards him, filling the doorway. And he looked up, and the door, and there was Sri Krishna, and the whole room was filled with his light. Won't you welcome me, Pundalik? Pundalik continued to massage his father's feet. I cannot, my dearest lord. My father will wake up if I move. I cannot disturb him. Now, in the olden days, if poor people didn't have any furniture in India, they would use a brick, to sit on. And so that is what Pundalik did. He threw a brick at Krishna's feet and said, "Have a seat, my lord, I will be right with you." Sri Krishna smiled, stepped on the bricks, and placed his hand on his hips. Like, really? You're making me wait? But once his father was in a deep, deep sleep, Pundalik arose and went to his lord. He fell to his knees and said, "I am sorry I made you wait." And Krishna could not do anything but laugh. "Pundalik, I am pleased with your devotion. Ask me for a boon and I will grant it." Pundalik couldn't say anything. "I have seen you with my own eyes. And if God, the Lord Sri Krishna, can wait for me, what else can I possibly want?" "Ask, Pundalik, it's a gift." And so Pundalik said, "Lord, stay here forever in exactly this position, with your hands the way they are. You are so beautiful, and everyone should experience your radiance." Krishna agreed. He blessed him, and in a flash of light, in his place stood a beautiful idol. All the people in the town were very, very happy, and they built a beautiful temple around it. Pundalik was loved and respected as the man that brought Lord Krishna himself to Pandharpur. This temple stands to this very day on the banks of the river Chandrabhaga, and it is a powerful, powerful place of pilgrimage. And that is my story of how the light of love and devotion brought Sri Krishna to Pandharpur. Thank you. You're muted, Em.
See, I was so excited to say thank you for sharing that story. I forgot to unmute myself. That was wonderful. You said at the start that you don't normally tell Indian stories. They're long and interwoven. So what stories do you normally tell? This is not.
So I love fairy tales, and I tend to do folk tales because they're shorter. There's not so much Indian myth and so much background. But I'm really learning how to extract the little stories between this. So a little bit addition, like say with the idol of Lord Krishna, there is an idol a few steps behind him of his wife Rukmini, the goddess. And there's another story of how she came to stand next to him and how that idol came to be in the temple. So, it's fun, and it was fascinating to me as a child. So I know all of the stories. It's just that I haven't ever, told anyone about them. So I'm having fun today. I'm hoping everyone enjoyed it.
I have no doubt everyone enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing all the more about all the other statues and all the other bits that you're learning to retell to us. Thank you so much for sharing. And now we're going to go to our very last storyteller for the night, someone who needs no introduction because I'm sure most of you are already infinitely familiar with Jo Henwood, who is the president of the AFTS and does 1,001 brilliant things to make us all be able to do the incredible things the AFTS does. And is our ringmaster, so does vast amounts of research. I am overwhelmed every time stuff comes through. But we're not here for the vast amounts of research that Jo provides us. We are here for her extraordinary storytelling and another Australian fairy tale. So I'm going to pass across to Jo, and she may give a bit of introduction, she might not, and then she will take it. She's going to take it right away. Excellent. Here is Jo Henwood with her contribution for tonight.
Jo, you're muted. Unmute.
In a green and gold island in the midst of the blue, blue harbour, there once lived a wharfie with his wife and 7 daughters. 6 of the daughters were tall and strong, but the youngest of all had been born with only 1 foot. When she was little, her father, the wharfie, had taken wooden offcuts from the boats that he had built, and from them he had fashioned a little wooden foot, and with a leather strap attached it to the edge of her leg. And so, though her name was Nell, sweet Nell, they all called her Nellie Woodfoot. Nellie Woodfoot struggled to do it. She could not play with her sisters. They were all playing with cartwheels and roller skating, skipping and hopscotch. They were all dressed in bright coloured clothes that they had made for themselves on a treadle sewing machine. But when Nellie put her wooden foot against the treadle, the machine raced away and the clothes were ruined. And her mother told her, "You should just wear the flour sacks." So Nellie went around in flour sacks and barefoot, thump, step, for her mother refused to buy her 2 shoes. "Why should I spend money on a pair of shoes when you're only ever going to use one of them?" Her sisters would go every day on the ferry, going away to school. But her mother said, "Why should anyone have to look at you? Oh, you hurt my eyes to see you." And that was why when anyone visited the small island that they lived in, her mother would lock Nellie away in a shed at the back of the house so no one should see or know. Her sisters could play in the grass, play in the bush. But Nellie, every afternoon, she would gather a bucket full of slops and carry it down to the foreshore and tip the scraps into the harbour. And there, rising out of the depths, would come a shark. And the shark would rise up through the waters and he would smile at her and thank her. That smiling shark was her only friend. He was the one who told her about the dance. The harbour master's son has got a new yacht. He is to sail all around the world. And so the harbour master has decreed there shall be a dance in the dance hall, and all who live in islands big and small shall come and be merry. All will be invited. Nell, you shall come too. Nellie was astonished at this. Only I could come too. So she went to her mother and she asked her, and her mother looked at her. And she looked at the sleek, strong daughters, and she looked back at Nellie and said, "Of course you can go, my dear, if you can catch the ferry." And at that very moment, the toot of the ferry down at the foreshore was ringing, and each of the 6 girls in their bright-coloured clothes lifted their skirts and ran heel and toe down the slope to leap gracefully onto the ferry and sail away to the dance of the harbour master's son. And Nellie came after them as fast as she could. Step thump, step thump, step thump. But she was too late. She was left behind, alone on the island, watching as everyone else went off to the lights and the music. And she was left alone again. And what could she do but let one solitary tear drip down her cheeks and drop into the harbour, salt water to salt water. And where that drop of tear fell, a ring spread out, and that ring was a frame as the face of the smiling shark rose up through that ring. "What are you doing here, Nellie? Why are you not at the dance?" "How can I go to a dance? How can I have any clothes fit to wear?" And the shark looked at her and said, "But there, can you not see? A dress is waiting for you." And she looked out, and she saw in the wake of the waters rushing away from the bow of the ferry, in that sea foam, the bubbles rising up there, shining and sparkling. "Deep, go down, Nellie." And she went down and rose up covered in sparkles, the bubbles of water, all clinging to a fish scale, sparkling, reflecting the light of the setting sun and the rising moon, all the colours of the rainbow through the waters, clinging in her gown of sparkle and dreams. But the shark, that smiling shark, was still not satisfied, and he dived again deep beneath the surface to bring up a treasure. A boot made of gold, and beneath it as pearl, a shining pearl, perfectly round, spinning at the base. And as the shark lifted it up to Nellie, it became part of her foot. And while Nellie struggled to express her thanks of gratitude, there was one more boon that shark would wish. And he swam around in a great circle once, twice, 3 times. And in that ring there rose up a ray, a stingray that swept underneath Nellie so that she could lift her up on the wings of the ray. And there she was in all her sparkling glory as the ray swam on, flying beneath the waves, lifting her up and down towards the light, towards the music, towards the dance. Now on that island, that great island of the harbour master, there on the crown of it was the harbour master's house, strong and bold, ready to see all that was around. And at the foot of the island, there was the wharf, where all the party-goers were gathering and giggling and gasping, going up in their bright summery clothes, up. And in the middle was the dance hall, halfway between the upper world and the lower. And the harbour master's son came down to that dance hall, and bang! The doors were flung open, and there he stood. And he looked around and saw ordinary people, with their ordinary lives, and their ordinary talk, and their ordinary dance. And at that moment, the lower doors opened. And there stood a woman unlike any other, dressed in moonlight and the sea, sparkling and glittering. And she put out her foot and slid, gliding towards him so that their hands met, and she could move towards him, dancing a dance unlike any other, so that she could glide and float as if on water, as if on air, and they could see each other, and neither of them were ordinary at all. On they danced, moving around, seeing each other until doot, doot, the horn of the ferry down at the wharf was ringing. And at once Nellie knew her sisters would be catching the ferry, heading home so soon, so quickly. She must get there before them. And she slid away from the hands of the harbour master's son, and she glided away, weaving between the others, going down to the foreshore where the stingray waited for her. And the harbour master's hand, his hands empty that had been holding hers, followed after, but in between, blocking their way, were all these other ordinary people, all of them heading away, not letting him get through. So that when he reached the foreshore, he was just in time to see that last sparkle of that wonderful dress and that wonderful girl disappearing into the depths. And he leaned out towards her to see her one more time, and the wave coming off the ferry washed towards him, bringing into his hands that golden slipper with the perfectly round shining pearl. a foot, a shoe that would last only for one person. That girl who could travel in water and in air, someone who could travel with him all across the world, if only he could find her. And so he set out across that blue harbour, going to islands large and small, near and scattered, searching for the one who could travel with him, if only she had her golden foot. Time was running out. He had his yacht, his fine yacht, ready to sail throughout the world, and he had gone to all the islands in the harbour, all except one. Now Nellie was sitting on the edge of the wharf, just sitting there, watching and waiting. She wore a flour sack and had a wooden boot. Her feet were filthy and her hands as well. But as she looked over to the horizon, she could see that sail blooming, coming faster and faster, bringing light, until she could see the harbour master's son, and he looked out and saw her, and he knew her. And he clambered up to the bow of the ship, and he lifted aloft that golden slipper to show, this is where you belong. This is what will help you travel. And as she rose up to see him there, a wave hit the side of the boat, and the harbour master's son was flung off down into the depths of the harbour. Nellie did not wait for some stingray to come. She needed no help. She only knew the harbour master's son needed her. And so she dived deep into the harbour and she swam on, not needing any magic at all except her own love to go to the harbour master's son, so that her foot swam back and forth, and the wooden foot like a rudder, giving her guidance, showing her the way to go. And the harbour master's son, falling deep below, reached out with that golden shoe towards her, and she reached down towards him, and at that moment the slipper met, and they were at one. And from the depths there rose up the smiling shark, who rushed them together, tossing them high and onto the deck of the yacht. And on Nellie's foot, that golden foot with the shining toe that spun so that she could rise up and go towards the harbour master's son. And there they danced around each other on the deck, and the wind filled the sail and carried them on throughout the world, travelling in water, in air, wherever the world would take them. And if the wind hasn't dropped, they are sailing on to this very day.
Oh, love it.
Oh,
Love it.
oh,
So much. Jo, that was wonderful.
good. Thank you.
My question to you is, of all the fairy tales in the world that you could have reset in Australia, why is Cinderella the one you chose?
I don't like Cinderella. It's one of my
That's what I'm asking.
fairy tales. It's all, I don't know, avaricious. It's socially mobile. It's nothing. And yet it's so easy to adapt. Like, that's maybe my third Australian Cinderella story. I don't know why, but it might explain why there are 500 or more different versions of Cinderella. Probably nobody else likes the story either, but they just keep telling it.
But I like Cinderella. I particularly like the version you just told. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Glad to have it.
And now that is the end of our conference. My conference. I'm already months and months ahead of us, friend. Conference. That's in August. You should all come to the Australian Fairy Tale Society Conference, 3rd and 4th of August in Victoria. That's the end of our concert. Friends, thank you all so much for coming, for sharing stories to our 4 other storytellers. Everyone's come along to listen and ask questions. We have some time left, so if you have some questions that you've put in the chat that haven't been answered, or you want to turn on your mic and say, excuse me, I'm very confused about, or I really want to know more about, now is your chance. Otherwise, go on into the night, dear friends. Keep cool, keep safe, and talk the very next time.
have some comments in the chat.
So I've moved everything to gallery view, and we can all do the same if we want to just hang out a bit and chat for a few minutes before we say good night. And good morning for Alyssa. She still has a dog to walk.
How is it going? Are you over in the UK already, Alyssa?
Yeah, I came over a week early. I wanted to see London, but I didn't have enough money, so I got a house there instead, and I'm seeing the countryside in Essex. That was really wonderful, everyone. Thank you for sharing your stories. It's really great. It's lots of inspiration there, I think.
I have a question for Em. Em, you asked everyone else questions about their stories, and no one asked you a question about your story. I had never heard your story. Is that a retelling of a different story, or your own original story, or what was the origin of your story?
That's a good question. The answer to your question is both. So that storytelling type is old. It's ancient. The version I drew from is from Scottish Travellers. There are Irish versions. There are Scandinavian versions. They're mostly, however, all told as joke tales. Or someone has a story. It was a magical adventure, and ha 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 ha. There's my story. But there is one, at least as far as I'm aware, one is often known as the Man in the Boat. I'm not fond of that title for obvious reasons, which particularly for the Scottish Traveller tradition, which is not just, oh, I was a flea and then I was a hare and there was a mysterious ghost and then there was elves and it's all just sort of a bit dreamlike. It's, you know, one single transformation. And I saw this and I went, oh my goodness, incredible. And then I read it, and I read a transcription of Betsy White, who was a Scottish traveller storyteller, in the, I think it's the Penguin Book of Scottish Folk and Fairy Tales. There are other transcriptions and points of Italian. But in the transcription, I read it and went, this is the least funny story I have read in a long while. There was no ounce of humour in the way it was transcribed. I've since heard Betsy tell it, and it's clearly, from how she's telling it, still telling it as it traditionally is, as a funny story, but there's still an incredible amount of integrity and honesty to it. So I knew I needed to tell it, but I couldn't with the ending, because it normally ends with Sandy gets the prize and that's it.
Yeah.
And so I sat on it and sat on it and sat on it, and finally I found an ending that felt legitimate. It didn't feel like I just tacked something on to go, oh look, I fixed it, hooray. It actually felt like the actual continuation of the story. So the answer is, it's an ancient story, and also it's my story.
You've told it really well, because there's that tension right up to the very end that we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, and we're all like, please, let's have we're really invested, or I was really invested in it having a happy ending and wanting it to work out. Yeah. So and you know, as soon as Sandy comes across that boat on the beach with her new family, we're like, no, don't get in the boat, don't get in the boat, don't, we know what's going to happen, you know. So there's all that tension. So I thought you did that really, really well. So
I really like the gender swapping and the you know, sort of Sandy being a man, becoming a woman, becoming a man, becoming a woman again, and like all that experience that, you know, and the life that Sandy has lived throughout the story. I just thought it was amazing, and I think like the ending was perfect. You know, it just, yeah, loved it.
Segueing on, something that Alyssa brought out, that we ended up with multiple other themes and threads that wove through the 5 stories, which was definitely not intended. And it's one of those storytelling magic things that almost always happens in
a lot of boats.
I love that.
That's strange how those things happen. I did a concert last year of Beer Folk and Fairy Tales, and I had to sleep because you're producing it ahead of time, the title ahead of time. So I went, yep, that's a good title. I'll produce it, and then I start doing my research, which stories I'm going to tell. And as I do it, I realized I had the wrong title, because they all had boats in them. All these queer fairy tales all had boats, and there was not a boat in the title. It was a great mistake. I had to start the show saying, I'm sorry, the show's got the wrong title. This is really all about boats and queer people. Apparently we like boats. Who knew?
We had a similar thing with the ghost stories. There was like missing children, and you know, it just seemed to be this theme that no one had, you know, interwoven into it. It just, again, it was just like magic. It just popped up. There were like all these themes about children, and in this case we have themes about boats and transformations. And
and water, which is a transforming element.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
came out beautifully. Yes.
Thank you so much. That was just lovely. All of you did a fabulous job.
Good. Okay.
And well done, Priti, for thinking of it.
Well, you know how it started out with love and darkness, and then light and darkness, and then you know what happened. So
Well, you may have to do it again, Priti, and then
And
I think we should. I think we can come up with another theme and do it maybe twice a year or even 3 times if it works out.
yeah.
We need enough people to tell or read. That is the thing. If we have enough people that are willing to tell and read at these things, this is ready next time.
Just thinking,
I'd probably suggest not always a Thursday night, because that's late night shopping, and I, for instance, need to go assist my elderly mother on a Thursday night, so perhaps a different night might work a little bit better.
Okay.
And of course, tonight, just the way of it, daylight saving played into that as well. So,
Yes.
again, my apologies for being late.
Not at
But
all.
lovely to see everyone, and particularly lovely to see Laura again, because it's been a long time since 2022. So, and Riley and everyone else as well. So,
but Shelley, you don't need to worry because they've recorded. Oh, actually, do you still want to be recording?
We can pause it now. Sorry, I didn't realize.
that can always be edited off, you know.